Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Craig Burrell, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Squadron Leader Stacey Davids. In early 1943, Allied forces in the Southwest Pacific area resumed their counter-offensive against the Japanese. In New Guinea, after successfully defending their base at Wa in early February, Australian and American forces moved to capture the two main Japanese bases in the Huon Gulf. Supported by air and naval forces, they commenced their drive against Salamua and Lae in late April. Progress along the Black Cat track was slow and arduous. Japanese resistance grew stronger as they neared the village of Mubo, about 20 kilometres inland, southwest of Salamua. During May, heavy fighting continued around the village. Japanese reinforcements arrived the next month and counterattacked at Lababia Ridge, beginning on the 20th of June. Over the next 6 weeks, the Australians advanced closer to Salamua along two axes. American troops who landed at Nassau Bay advanced along the coast. The Japanese drew back to Salamua and brought in further reinforcements from Lae. But on the 4th of September, a major Allied seaborne landing at Lae forced the Japanese to give up Salamua and consolidate their remaining troops at Lae. Australian troops moved into Salamua and occupied it on the 11th of September 1943, 80 years ago today. Today we commemorate the capture of Salamua. We pay our respects to the men and women commemorated here on the Roll of Honour and to the survivors who returned home. During the drive to capture Salamua, the Australians suffered over 1,000 casualties, including 343 dead. Shortly, we will hear the story of one of those lost during this bitter campaign. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Return to Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Clubs Association. We welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial and students on behalf of the New South Wales schools: Sydney Adventist College from Auburn, Tregeagle Public School from Tregeagle, and Wairala Public School from Wairala. If you are able, please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. Please be seated if you can do so. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the hearts of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Mention about his book. Today, we remember and pay tribute to Acting Corporal Leslie Zantuck. Leslie Zantuck was born in the Melbourne suburb of Prahran on the 4th of October 1919, the son of First World War veteran William Zantuck and his wife Elizabeth. Leslie grew up alongside his brothers and sisters in Melbourne. He joined the 2nd Australian Imperial Force in Melbourne on the 28th of March, 1941. His first few months were spent with the 4th Training Battalion at Darley, to the northwest of Melbourne, where he learned the basic skills of an infantryman. Leslie fell afoul of military authorities several times, going absent without leave and being fined. Zantuck was then sent overseas, arriving in the Middle East on the 23rd of September 1941. A month later, he was allotted to the 2nd 7th Australian Infantry Battalion with the rank of private. The 2nd 7th Battalion had been formed in October 1939, and since May 1940 had been fighting in North Africa. The 2nd 7th was then sent to fight in Greece. During that ill-fated campaign and the loss of Crete in May, the battalion was virtually wiped out. It began reforming in Palestine from a small number of 2nd, 7th men who remained in the Middle East. When Leslie Zantuck joined the battalion, it had recently moved from Palestine to Syria. Leslie's military discipline problems continued, and after a few more unauthorized absences, he completed a 3-week stint in the Australian Corps Field Punishment Center. The 2nd, 7th left the Middle East in mid-March 1942. Stopping for a time at Ceylon, today's Sri Lanka, to provide defense for the island, the battalion arrived home in Australia on the 4th of August 1942. After a welcome home parade in Melbourne, the battalion went into camp at Seymour. A few weeks later, they moved to Brisbane for further training before redeployment to the Southwest Pacific. Embarking on SS Tasman on the 13th of October, the battalion arrived at Milne Bay in eastern Papua on the 20th of October, 1942. In mid-January 1943, the 2nd 7th Battalion was sent to New Guinea, flown into the town of Wau to defend it from a looming Japanese attack. Leslie contracted malaria and was out of action for nearly a week before recovering and returning to his unit. With Wau secured, Australian forces began pushing forward in late April, intent on capturing the 2 main Japanese bases in the Huon Gulf, Lae and Salamua. The 2nd 7th fought major actions at Mubo in May and at Bob Doobie in July and August. Leslie Zantuck was there through this grueling campaign and was promoted to acting corporal in the field at the end of August. The Australians continued to press in on Salamua against heavy enemy resistance, and by early September, it was in sight from the surrounding mountains. As the Japanese pulled out most of their troops, the Australians advanced. On the afternoon of the 11th of September 1943, a handful of Australians from the 42nd Battalion patrolled along the isthmus and entered the town of Salamua. About a kilometer to the west, B Company of the 2nd 7th Battalion under Major Harry Dunkley, MC, was advancing towards Salamua. With it was Leslie Zantuck. As the men pushed forward through largely abandoned Japanese defenses, they surprised a small enemy force which fled. As they approached a feature codenamed Bicep, B Company reached a kunai knoll and came under heavy machine gun fire from a hidden enemy rear guard. A dozen men were hit, 5 of whom were killed outright. Among the dead was Leslie Zantuck. The 2nd 7th casualties during the Salamua-Lae campaign amounted to 93 and 221 wounded. Leslie Zantuck's remains were buried in Lae War Cemetery, New Guinea. He was 23 years old. His name is listed on the Roll of Honor on my left among almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Acting Corporal Leslie Zantuck, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub at Gallipoli with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the Director, staff and volunteers, we thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support during the Memorial's development project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening.